In all seriousness, I wanted to pick up at the end of that TED Talk. You give a call to action. And you're sitting at TED, which is one of these places where the titans of Silicon Valley gather. And you called them all out and said, what are you going to do? What happened after the talk? Did anything happen?
Well, it was quite amazing because Chris Anderson, who's the head of TED, he came up on stage and he said, Mark, Cheryl, we know you're watching. Come and tell us. Come to the TED and respond to this. And I stepped off stage, and literally within about 2 minutes, somebody from TED came up to me and they said, we want to put the video up straight away. And then they said, but Facebook have complained. And they said, they say that you've got your facts wrong and it's full of mistakes. And it's kind of like, this is sort of, I've been through this process so many times. I mean, everything I do triggers a legal letter, triggers a complaint, triggers this type of stuff. And it always goes through the same process, which is I go, and I panic, and I think, oh no, what have I done this time? And I was like, and I was running through it. I was like, but we've fact checked everything. We know that this is. And I said, well, what are they going to come back with? And they said, well, we'll wait and see. We've asked them to email by the morning. And in the meantime, because Facebook was actually sponsoring TED, it was like their first year. And it was pretty amazing, because when I stopped, at the end of the video, you see my face go like this, because I looked down at the front row, and there's this guy just glaring at me. And this is why I sort of tried to scarper off stage. Anyway, so there was this kind of massive kerfuffle, and I really admired the fact that TED just sort of were, well, this is tough. This is our stage, and we need to say these things. And essentially, they didn't come back with anything, and they put the video straight up. And there was no response from Facebook, and they didn't come up onto the main stage and rebut those points, and they've refused ever to give any interview with us. And I went to an event. Actually, Janine is here around the back. She was the chairing. It's a panel event with Nick Clegg earlier this summer. I was there too. Were you there too?
At Founders, yeah.
When he called me a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
This is the man who is in charge of his job is to police disinformation on Facebook, and he pushed out this disinformation about the Cambridge Analytica story and what the accusations were. And I find their behaviour as a company profoundly troubling. And one of the reasons why why I think what you're doing is so important is because there's some really influential people in this room, and you're representing really influential brands. And the question I think you really need to be asking yourself is Facebook and Instagram, are these safe spaces for your brands to be appearing? Because you are the money supply. You are the thing that has made Facebook into this, trillion.
So let's talk about that a bit, because many people in this room will be aware that the amount of money that fashion companies are spending with companies like Facebook and, of course, Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, it's just growing. It's become the predominant way of connecting with consumers.
Because it's so effective.
Yeah, it was effective in targeting people during the referendum and the presidential election, but it's also effective in targeting consumers and getting them to part with their money. So in that way, how do you see the advertising industry as being complicit in this kind of end of democracy?
It's really funny, because it just didn't strike me until about 6 months ago. And about 6 months ago, Cannes Lion, the advertising industry festival announced that Alexander Nix, the ex-CEO of Cambridge Analytica, would be coming to speak there. And his bio said, amazing global leader, Alexander Nix, who's built up a... And that was his intro. And I looked at the range of other speakers they had in an entire week at this event, and this subject, this topic, was absolutely nowhere. And Anyway, and I kind of went and did a sort of guerrilla screening of this Netflix documentary, The Great Hack there. But it is exactly that, is that the advertising industry is completely complicit in this. It is the money supply. And the brands and the fashion industry and these other industries, you are also completely part of it. I mean, and that's because we are all part of it. We are all part of this this ecosystem and the financing and the economics of that, and also, therefore, the kind of moral responsibility. It does rest on us. You know, we know these companies are not going to change themselves. Facebook isn't going to spontaneously break itself up. And, you know, we know that the governments aren't doing anything. You know, they are also, for their own reasons, they want to be able to use Facebook and Google for their own purposes. And so this is where I think we've got to really be aware that the sort of cavalry isn't coming. We are in this really urgent and quite desperate situation in some ways, and that's where it is on us as individuals. And that's why kind of I'm so pleased that you're addressing these issues, I guess, in a space like this.
Yeah. As a result of your reporting, Facebook did get fined, $5 billion by the FTC and another $100 million by the SEC. And rather than create some kind of shock to Facebook's stock price at that stage, which had recovered, it went up. How do you explain that?
It's just so, I know, it's kind of, I mean, it's incredible because, so Christopher Wylie is in the audience here, and Shamir Sani's around as well. But it was Chris's, what's kind of amazing about that is that it was evidence that, we published and then Chris handed over to the authorities that enabled the FTC to investigate and to bring this absolutely record-breaking fine against Facebook, biggest in history. The biggest in history, and yet the share price went up because it was a relief, because that's just small change to a global company of this size. And the SEC as well, who, it's a regulator which actually has some teeth, and again, that was a $100 million fine. And the thing is that we are now living in this really, really different world than we were previously, in which how do you hold people to account? And how do you hold companies to account? And $5 billion is just the cost of doing business to Facebook. I mean, it's just, you can build that into your business model, as they have done. And so you are in a space where laws do not work. And, the legislation of our national governments do not work. And these companies will not even come and answer questions to our lawmakers about this pivotal election that is going to change, the future of Britain forever. And
you mean the one coming up in
well,
few weeks?
the one that we know. In 2016, this was on nobody's radar, and there was this series of deeply, deeply problematic elections, of which Brexit was one, and the US presidential election was one. And the thing I say there about how we have no idea of what actually happened, we don't have the evidence, and that's still completely true. All of that evidence is still locked inside Facebook servers. And, I think it is absolutely incompatible with democracy. The fact that a private company can hold all of this information about something as important as the elections of every single country across the world. That information is being held in a private company that is beyond the rule of law. Now, if that doesn't trouble you, then I don't know, maybe you've listened to too many climate crisis talks, or maybe you're troubled out, I don't know. But
well, there's a lot of trouble this morning.
I know.
It's kind of the wider world.
I know, but there's so many parallels.
What are the parallels?
I mean, those were really interesting talks. What Extinction Rebellion is doing is amazing, and And that's where, again, I think the people in this room are really consequential, because that is changing the language and the imagery and the concept of what these subjects... It's taking it off the news pages in that way. But the thing that really struck me was, you know, they're saying that they've changed the language of how we talk about the global warming, and now we're talking about a climate crisis. And I was thinking, well, that's exactly what we have. We have a global democratic crisis. That's what this is. That's what these out-of-control companies mean. And it's so much bigger. I mean, our problem here in Britain is we look at everything through this very small lens of Westminster politics, and everything is tarred with that, and that's why I kind of get such heat for being some sort of rabid Ramona. But it's so much bigger, and it's so much bigger than partisan politics. And I think with the climate crisis, it was such a big problem. It's been so hard for people. You know, when the problem is so big, it's like the sun. You can't look at it directly, so you feel you can't do anything. And I feel at the moment, in terms of what technology is doing to the world, and particularly what it's doing to our democratic systems, we're in a bit of a similar position. It's such a big and intractable problem that you don't really know where to start with it.
Mm-hmm. So we're in the midst of a general election here in the UK. It's the 4th general election in about 4 years. What do you think is going to happen? You know, how, you know, if things haven't changed, you know, Facebook still has all of this data and information that it will not reveal. If they're not answerable to parliaments and governments around the world, is democracy over?
Well, in Britain, we're in a pretty interesting position, which is every single body and regulator which has anything to do with elections has said our electoral laws do not work. They are absolutely unfit for purpose. They can be abused by any bad actor, whether in this country or outside, and we need to urgently fix them. The Electoral Commission has said that. The ICO has said that. The DCMS committee in Parliament has said that. I mean, we are in no doubt about it, and yet what did the government do? It called an election and just totally ignored that. And what you see very clearly is that actually, you know, the protecting us is low down that list of priorities, and the political objectives are very high up it. And, you know, you see it also in the fact that this interesting, very, very interesting state of affairs, I don't know if people know about, of this report on Russian interference, which is being personally blocked by Boris Johnson.
And not likely to be released until well into next year at this stage, after the election is over, after, you know, Brexit has happened, assuming the Tories win a majority. And then we may find out something much, much later.
I mean, it is so shocking beyond belief. And I did this story at the weekend, there was so much news. I mean, that's the thing at the moment, there's just so much news. So this story just got lost in the mix. But I did this story about how Boris Johnson, when he was Foreign Secretary, he was in the middle of the Skripal crisis. Russia had, used a chemical weapon on British streets, which had killed a woman. And Boris Johnson went to a NATO summit in Brussels to talk to foreign ministers about Russian sanctions. Boris Johnson came out of that meeting. He gave his security detail the slip, which is unprecedented. He took a flight to Italy, where he stayed in the house of his friend, the Russian businessman who owns the Evening Standard and the Independent. And then the new fact we discovered was that whilst he was there, that man's father, who is an ex-KGB agent, flew in from Moscow to meet Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson was pictured later that day flying home alone from an airport, completely dishevelled. And the passerby said he looked like he was going to throw up on the tarmac. Who is this guy?
He's our prime minister.
But seriously, I mean, he is not just exposing himself to risk there, he is exposing the entire country. You do not do this as a Secretary of State who is dealing with a crisis with a country that has literally unleashed a prohibited nerve agent on your streets. And to expose yourself to the level of recklessness of that is beyond belief, but also naivety. Because, I didn't even realize this. Somebody tweeted it into my thing after I did the article. And there's a quote from Putin from 2006. Putin was in the KGB at the same time as Alexander Lebedev. And there's a quote from Putin, and he says, "There is no such thing as a former KGB man." Putin would know.
We were talking about activism earlier this morning with Kelsey, Juliana, and some of the others. In a way, Carole, you've become not just a journalist, you've become an activist around some of these causes. And, the work that you're doing is obviously having a profound impact, including the $5 billion fine, as small as it might mean to Facebook, a record-setting fine from the FTC. How do you think about your journalism and how it's shifting away from maybe what people consider traditional journalism, where you get really deep into these topics and you go after them and you give a TED Talk on stage?
Well, for me, it's because this slippage which has happened, which is that it used to be the case that like bad people would do bad things, journalists would find out about it, they would hunt down the evidence, they would publish it, and the bad people would be held to account. And that's the system that we've had, and that worked really well, And that doesn't work anymore. And so I found myself in this place of finding out about these things, these incredibly serious crimes and abuses. But yet, people don't get held to account. And a lot of that, it's a very complex reasons why. One of them is the fact that there are so few journalists in this country and there are so few independent news outlets, and most of them are really partisan and owned by billionaires who have an interest one way or the other. And so we just haven't, we felt this thing, and I think Janine, she's around somewhere, with the Snowden story, that was the same way. The Guardian published this stuff, but the other newspapers didn't come in behind. And so I just, for me, it is this thing about being an activist for the truth. And I don't think you can separate yourself from being a journalist, from being a citizen of a country that is, in such an extreme situation where, for whatever reason, I have gone out and collected this evidence, and I do have this understanding, and I get asked to speak at things now, and it feels just to me that it is part of the job. I'm just trying to communicate the story and the importance and why we need to care about it. And that for me is just absolutely part and parcel of the journalism. All I've wanted to do is try and communicate the story. And the thing about the Cambridge Analytica story is that it was broken. I didn't break it. It was broken in December 2015 by a journalist called Harry Fox Davis. And he uncovered a lot of the key facts way back then, but nobody took any attention. And then I started writing about it, and another journalist in Switzerland, Hannes Grassedger, we were writing about this through 2017, and Facebook was just able to ignore it. And in fact, in the SEC report, it says Facebook lied to us. That's in the report. Facebook lied to me in its answers about Cambridge Analytica. And so this thing of I felt I had to find a different way of telling this story. And that's where Chris was a gift from the gods, because it was, and then Shamir as well in with the vote leave fraud. It's that thing about humanizing this story, having somebody who's able to speak to it directly and is able to explain it. And that just puts it in a different kind of league. And
yeah.
and I feel almost that there is this thing of like, you need to keep telling the story differently, in a different way, until it goes through. And that's what we found. I mean, that's the Greta Thunberg message. That's the climate crisis lesson. You just got to keep going.
It's come at a huge personal cost to you, though, right? Because I've been following you actively on Twitter for quite some time now, and the trolls come out. You know, Andrew Neil, the BBC presenter, called you a mad Catwoman. You know, Nick Clegg accuses you of, propagating conspiracy theories. This is a challenging way of pursuing journalism. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of personal impact on you?
I think, basically, I do think kind of being a woman or a person of colour, doing anything in public life does bring a higher level of attention and attacks. And that's not just me, that is all sorts of people. But I find it really profoundly depressing at times. And I find it really profoundly depressing because it's a compliment that they can't come after the journalism. You know, they kept on trying to come after the journalism and they kept on failing. But what they can come after is me. And so I am the weak spot of this story. And the fact that actually, as I say, there's not been enough journalists come up behind, it's made me this sort of like easy target. So it's a compliment, but it's also pretty painful because misogyny, it just works. Sexism really works. And really early on, actually, and Chris will remember this sort of moment that we had when, for me, it was this thing about reporting while female, and the sort of price you pay for that, and you get it as well. You know, we saw it with these attacks in Parliament. There were 2 MPs who stood up on the story, and they got this really homophobic abuse. And it was like they got attacked for legislating while homosexual. You know, like doing any of these jobs that, it's just this, we're in this world of propaganda, and, propaganda's effective, and that's why they do it.
Well, I want to applaud you because I think the work you're doing is so important. And I hope that the messages that Carole has underscored again here today will resonate with you and that you'll take them with you back to your companies and teams because, a lot of the things we've been talking about today, they seem like these complex, distant things that are hard to understand, but it takes someone like Carole to explain it to all of us. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks for having me.